Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You join us here at the National Motor Museum for a lecture on the history of the motor car, delivered by the celebrated motoring authority, Mr. Jeremy Clarkson.
Thank you. Good evening. The motor car was invented in 1885 in Mannheim, Germany, by Carl Benz and the other one. And for the next 70-odd years, there were loads more, really thousands of them. And they all looked basically the same. They all had headlamps here, notably. For the next few years, it looked a bit better. Some of them were red or green or blue, and they all broke down and went rusty. And then we got this. The Golf GTI was not just a fabulous car, but the enduring symbol of a fabulous era. In the 1980s, your house was worth more than Egypt, and you used the profits from your endless share dealings to put some fizz in your drink and a spring in your step. For the have-nots, it wasn't much fun, but the haves were having a ball. They hoped it would never end, and their hopes were turned into reality when Neil Kinnock went down at the waterfront. But for me, the best thing about the 80s was that we waved goodbye to the MGB. We don't thanks, you're ugly, you're slow, you don't handle properly, you're symbolic of everything that was wrong with Britain in the 70s. You should have been called the winter of discontent. And we especially didn't want you when, for the same sort of money, we could have a hot hatchback. The hot hatchback, I think, was the best ever automotive invention. The Golf GTI would, and did actually, get my vote as car of the century. Its body panels were from a normal Golf, so they were simple and cheap to mend. It had a normal hatchback boot too, so you could use it to move a filing cabinet. It was sensible and practical, but underneath the plain wrapping it had a powerful engine and firm suspension. So, on the open road, it could send 5 million volts through your hair. He had a Golf GTI, obviously. And so did she. And he drove his around in reverse. However, let's get one thing straight. Volkswagen is always credited with having invented the hot hatchback, but that's not entirely accurate. As in so many things, the Germans were in fact beaten to it by the British. Vauxhall had taken one of its extremely dull Chevettes and used the world's largest shoehorn to fit a 2.3-litre engine under the bonnet. The heavy Chevy that resulted was a very fast car indeed. But this Sunbeam was even faster. With its 2.2-litre Lotus engine, it would get from 0 to 60 in 6.6 seconds, and that's quick, even by today's standards. Both these cars were rear-wheel drive too, so there was some gung-ho handling to be had. They were loud, they were leery, they were rotten and vicious. They were the children of a punk generation. Unfortunately, they were not what you'd call everyday cars, because every day they'd break down. This meant that the people who bought them had to go to work on the bus. So, instead of buying another, they bought a Golf GTI. I transformed this car. I was the key. No, not me. GTI, fuel injection. Fuel injection made it not only fast and responsive, but also economical and reliable. Someone wrote a song about it once.
I won't let you down, won't let you down again. I won't let you down, won't let you down again.
Initially, the GTI caught Volkswagen napping. To begin with, they said it was for the German market only. Then, reluctantly, they said Britain could have a handful, but they'd all be left-hand drive. It didn't take them long, however, to realise that this car was no flash in the pan. They'd created something that was all things to all men. In those early days, the Golf only had one serious rival, Ford's XR3, which was just as fast and handled just as well.
It's a horny-looking little thing, isn't it?
It was the same size as a Golf, too, and about the same price. But the drivers, they were completely different.
My Golf goes 0 to 60 in 8.4 seconds.
OK, but your Escort XR3i has a top speed of 116 mile an hour.
Car Magazine, August 82.
Fair enough.
Ford's first XR3i model proved too gutless and too uncivilised to hold a candle to the GTI.
The XR3i handles, grips, accommodates...
Where the
and
Golf
looks...
earns a creditable 9 points out of 10 for its well-insulated ride, the Escort bangs and thumps its way to a mere 5.
Our first preference would be an XR3i. We
It's the only
have
article
the
you can
Escort.
find.
It
I've
says
got a
here,
pile
the
of
Golf
articles.
GTI is a girlie's car.
Where does it say that?
It doesn't say that, but it's obvious.
This is pointless. The only difference between the GTI and the XR3 was the people who bought them. Those with shell suits bought the Escort, while those with barber jackets bought the Golf. It was as simple as that. Either way, they sold like hotcakes, thanks perhaps to these simple yet succulent ingredients, which made them cheap yet fruity. In 1983, 10% of all Escorts that left the showroom were XR3s, while more than a quarter of all Golfs were GTIs. This was a time when greed was good, greed worked, and there was big money to be made from hot hatches. So even the dullest cars had some chilies shoved up their exhaust pipes. However, despite a number of attempts to improve the breed and despite Essex man's fondness for the Escort, Volkswagen's Golf was still the favoured son.
Thought I knew what a good car was all about, but it wasn't until I drove one of these that I realised just how good they really are.
I would summarise the GTI by saying that it was the best car that I've ever driven.
I think that it is actually the best crackerjack hot hatch in the world.
It's easy to see why. It was the original. GTI became the generic name for hot hatches in the same way that Hoover became a generic name for vacuum cleaners. This is what we're going to buy, and we're not going to change our minds unless something comes along which is demonstrably better. Welcome, everyone, to the 205 GTI. It didn't matter which engine you had, the 1.6 or the 1.9, this little Peugeot was fan-bleeding-tastic. And then there was the design. Ital had done the Golf, and Ital is one of the great Italian styling houses. But Pininfarina is better, and Pininfarina had done the Peugeot. In its environment, i.e. right now, this is one of the very, very fastest cars that money can buy. You could bring a Ferrari down here, or a Porsche 911, or a Lamborghini Diablo, and not one of them would be able to keep up with this. I promise you. There's always the sense that you don't really need to slow down for corners. You can, in fact, put your foot down and go around them even faster, and it just hangs on. They tell me that this part of Norfolk is absolutely beautiful, but I'm sorry, I really don't have time to look. Put very simply, the 205 GTI was smaller, lighter, more responsive and faster than the Golf GTI. And then Peugeot decided to ladle even more kudos into the mix by making a rally version. This may have looked like a 205, but the only thing the two had in common was the windscreen frame. The rally version was mid-engine, turbocharged, four-wheel drive. It was 5 times more powerful than the normal road cars. It was basically a Formula One racer with mudguards. The speeds it could achieve were phenomenal, and so too were the size of the crowds that turned out to see it. Pretty soon, Lancia challenged the Peugeot with its Delta S4, and then Audi fought back with a short wheelbase version of its Quattro. Even Rover turned up to the party with a fat Metro. Rallying was no longer seen as a sport for people with Bovril and bobble hats. It was a high-tech hot hatch battlefield, and Ford decided they too wanted a slice of the action. So they began work on a car that would turn the sport, quite literally, upside down. The car they came up with, the RS200, was not designed to look like a mainstream model. It was purpose-built and purposeful, a modern-day off-road GT40. Now, the rules of rallying at the time were very boring, but quite simple, so pay attention. In order to compete in the top class, which was called Group B, don't ask why, you had to make 200 examples of the car you wanted to race. This was to stop the richer companies developing a hugely expensive, hugely fast one-off. But 200, that was nothing. You keep 20 or 30 for yourself and then flog the rest off at whatever price you fancied. When it emerged into the woods, Ford really did think that their £10 million investment would be paid off several times over. But it was not to be. On only its second outing in Portugal, it ploughed into a wall of spectators. "30 were injured, 3 were killed, and within weeks the Group B cars were banned." Ford now had a big problem. A warehouse full of RS200s that had no rallying pedigree whatsoever. So they converted them into road cars and set off down the A12 with a bag full of brochures and some winning smiles. Hi. Bye. Please. Sadly, they arrived in EC1 to find that the stock market had just crashed, and that all of a sudden no one was particularly interested in a Ford, which cost £50,000. They were eventually forced to sell the RS200 for chicken feed, and now no one can even remember it ever existed. In fact, if you ask anyone to name a fast Ford from this period of history, only one name will crop up: the Cosworth. The turbo on the early models worked in geological time. And it had the most preposterous wide-boy image. But you tended not to be thinking about that sort of thing as you came out of a little left-right kink and nailed it. This really was the ultimate hot hatchback. Now, this is not any old Cosworth. It used to be mine. This was the very car I used to run around in the early 90s. Now, I did most things in and with it, but one of the regrets I have is that I never brought it to North Yorkshire and never took it over the Buttertubs Pass. Time now to rectify that. One of my all-time favourite roads is going to meet one of my all-time favourite cars. Nostalgic moment, this. It's like playing tonsil hockey with an old girlfriend. Exciting and yet strangely familiar. It's all coming back to me. I even remember its name. It's not, as you might think, a Ford Escort RS Cosworth. It's a Cosworth. And there's a special way of saying that. Don't move your lips, and then at the end, leave your mouth open, okay? Let's practice that. Cosworth. I've got a Cosworth. And this is where you really start to be thankful for the four-wheel drive, because all that stands between me and a, I don't know, 500-foot tumble to a fiery death is a little green hosepipe. Still, at least it isn't busy. Now, this is why this is called the Buttertubs Pass. These are the Buttertubs here. They're big holes in the ground caused by years of precipitation eroding the Carboniferous sedimentary limestone. Now, the important thing to remember about this geological... Sorry, but big holes in the ground are no match for getting out there and making big holes in the air. Ooh, what's this? Traffic. brakes, which of course you need on this road because you never know where the sheep's going to be, and they're worth at least 50p these days. This is just such a good car. Why doesn't Ford make stuff like this today? Why don't they? Why don't you make stuff like this today?
The trouble is, of course, that the Cosworth came along just as the 80s began to implode. New words became etched on the national consciousness: Blackbird Lees, ram raiding. Police video footage made superstars of the joyriders, and insurance premiums went through the roof, past the chimney pot and right to the top of the television aerial. I was once quoted £25,000 to insure a Cosworth for 1 year, £3,000 more than it was worth. The results were alarming. Hot hatch sales dwindled to naught, and the architect of the era that created them was ousted from number 10. The Berlin Wall fell over and people gave up champagne because it was cruel to grapes. Then, when Mr. Prescott took charge of transport, it was a case of tilt. Game over.
Good night.
Clark is back in a mo with his look at the family car. Basil Fawlty is beating some respect into his in Fawlty Towers on Gold now, while it's a case of larceny for the Bottom Boys on G2. UK TV choice.
Road testers were startled to find that it could do 0 to 60 in 6.6 seconds. But it's useless at braking.